Welcome to the Level Up Artist Podcast. We're your hosts, Adriana Amay and
Jackie Sanders. We are two art professionals sharing forward the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journeys.
we talk to artists, leaders, and art professionals to demystify the creative process and discover new ways to succeed as a career-minded artist.
If you find value in these conversations, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast and you'll be notified when we drop a new episode. On today's episode, we are excited to piggyback off of our previous episode, Handling Difficult Clients, by kind of putting a new spin on it in terms of what we touched on with the ownership of what you can do as a business owner when these situations happen. So, talking about the art of saying no and why setting boundaries in your creative business is one of the most powerful tools that you have as a business owner. So, whether it's turning down misaligned clients, choosing which opportunities to pursue, or just like managing your own expectations going into a project, really learning how to say no with that clarity can really completely shift your experience and the way you work and grow within any opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad we're diving a little bit deeper into this part of the topic, because, identifying the red flags like we talked about is important. But sometimes you have to say no even to the nice clients. Like if there's something off about it, it might not be them, it might not be you, it just might not be the right time. So we definitely wanted to dive into that a little bit more. So as creatives, we of course wear all the hats, and sometimes saying yes to everything, either out of fear or scarcity mindset, pressure, survival mode. I mean, sometimes it's just like, well, those $100 would definitely help, pay the bills or put gas in the car. So we absolutely get it. But if you overcommit, it can lead to burnout, resentment, blurry goals, or even missed opportunities if you're saying yes to something else. So there is that. So I think it's hard, especially if there's any people-pleasing tendencies involved. Guilty as charged, but it can take some reprogramming, if you will, as you try to shift, especially if you are self-employed and or have some of your art business, provide some of your necessary income um, to kind of shift from being an employee to being the CEO, right? And in order to do so, it may sound like saying no can be selfish, but no, it's actually strategic. It helps protect your energy and your creative vision, and it makes space for the stuff that you actually want to do and can move you forward.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there are always seasons where you feel like, okay, maybe I have to say yes to everything, thinking that more opportunities are better, right? And I've definitely felt that in various seasons of my life. But oftentimes, when I just say yes, yes, yes to everything without actually understanding the trade-off of what I'm saying yes for, it can often leave me feeling like overwhelmed, sometimes even underpaid, doing opportunities just for the experience, and creatively drained too. I found that especially after getting laid off in my corporate job, or if I've just had a season where I'm thinking expansively, which don't get me wrong, that is a very good thing. And we want you to say yes, to get out of your comfort zone occasionally, but not to the point where it becomes destructive, right? Not to the point where there's a difference between expansive and lack of focus, which is what we're going to talk about today because it can be very tempting, especially when the paycheck may feel right, right? So, we're going to talk about setting boundaries, not just with our clients, but also with ourselves, which sometimes can be more difficult. And remember, it's not just about being rigid with having these hard rules all the time, but it's about being more intentional with the opportunities that we pursue and the type of clients that we want to work with.
Yeah, so we'll definitely be talking about the mindset shift behind saying no. We'll go through some real life examples of how this may show up in your creative business and offer some tools for navigating, some of these tough choices, especially when you do need the money and or feel guilty about turning things down. But let's dig into boundaries, to create space for the kind of work and life you actually want.
Yeah, I think ultimately to kind of start the conversation, it comes down to your mindset, right? Like, especially as business owners and as artists, there's not a one set path on how you run things, which is very exciting, but can also be very frustrating at times. There's not a set guidebook like there is with being an engineer or a programmer or any other traditional paths. But when you have your own business, and especially as a creative, one thing that really stuck with me was a piece of advice I got a few years ago that was saying when you say no more often, it actually makes your yeses more meaningful. And I think that really helped shift my people pleasing mindset when it comes to opportunities because it makes sure that when you do say yes to it, an opportunity, you can give your all to it. And it just means more to your client because every no clears space for more aligned opportunities and makes those yeses, like I said, more powerful. Because having those boundaries, it's not just a rejection. It's also thinking about, okay, it's not that you're saying no to this person, is that you're redirecting and allowing space for people that are a more good fit for you, whether in your style, whether in what you want to be compensated for, maybe a community that you want to reach or a conversation you want to have with the public. If you're too busy being stuck with all these kind of like busy work clients that don't really have to do with what you want to stand for or what you want your art to represent, then when that perfect client comes to you, you're not going to have space for them, right? So I think when we're thinking about this conversation, I want you all to remember thinking from a mindset standpoint, focusing on what your values are, what your goals for your career and your life are, and ultimately like a very zoomed out vision of like, well, what is your purpose? What is your ultimate long term goal with what you're putting out into the world?
Yeah. It's almost like the whole like 5-year question, where do you want to be kind of thing. But
Yeah.
the artist edition of that or the creative business owner version of that doesn't have to specifically be 5 years, but you kind of need to know where you're headed for sure. And of course, there's several factors you need to consider, before you say no. I mean, finances, let's be realistic. Will this sustain or support your business? Like, is it that tight of a month or upcoming month? And, sometimes we all do jobs that we're like, it pays the bills. So, got to be realistic. Creative integrity, like, does it align with the kind of work you want to be known for? I've known some, we both know of some artists that do very well financially who will still do jobs on the side that they don't post about because they're like, you know what, it pays the bills. I just may not want more of that kind of work to be publicized, and I don't want to attract more of that sort of job. But this
Mhm.
one aligned and the funds were nice, so we're gonna do it. Of course, again, creative integrity, also not necessarily doing something you really don't want to do. Like at least have some interest in it, of course. And then is it a project audience that's aligned with your ideal collector or client, even if maybe the theme or the style of it isn't, or even the budget of it isn't, but it could lead to other opportunities. And, we're talking about general exposure versus intentional connection. Exposure should always serve your growth because it doesn't pay bills, as we know. No exposure bucks for the power company. But it also should not distract from it. So it's always that, if you hear that trap, but you'll get all this exposure, but we're not paying you, just run. But that, yeah, anyways, that's a different story.
Yeah, and I think on that, it's if it is a situation where you say, okay, this may not be the most lucrative opportunity, but let's say it's with a fellow nonprofit that you really support or a community space that you have a deep connection to, then I think that's a difference of it's not just this general exposure to random people that you don't really have a connection to. It's you're making work and intentionally connecting with a community or a mission or an audience that like you as the artist are choosing to do it potentially for less financially, which we talked about in the other episode. Because yeah, your client should never be deciding if exposure is your payment. You should be the only one deciding if you are offering to do it for that, which is a very key difference.
Yeah, it
Um,
is. Plus, depending on what it is, you may not even be able to write it off in your taxes. So, yeah.
Yep, very true. And I think that kind of leads into the bulk of the decision making comes down to is there's often two categories of saying no as a business owner, right? There's saying no to clients and saying no to yourself and having that discipline. They can be very different mindsets and definitely have different challenges, especially if you are a people pleaser, like many of us are. But Adriana, I want to hear kind of your input on saying no to clients and why you feel that is important within the creative business.
Yeah, of course. So I'd say in saying no to clients, I mean, we talked about some of the red flags before, but quick reminder in case you haven't listened to that episode. Some of these could include, if you're doing a commission or a mural, or even a portrait of some sort, you're gonna have like maybe it's the scope, maybe it's the amount of detail or complexity they're asking for. And then you compare it against the timeline and perhaps even your creative control, and you're like, there's something here that's just like, it's not mathing, it's not adding up. Sometimes this can translate with the types of jobs where, you're like, oh, but it's $1,000, but it's far away. And with all these other constraints involved, you're like, this other local job for $300, it actually sounds a lot better, and they let me do my own thing. So it's like, you're always like trying to weigh these things. Kind of like we've discussed before, like you definitely want to trust your gut. If it feels like a stretch or a strain, it probably is. Um, obviously get a second opinion if you want to, hopefully you have a network of other artists that you trust and that you can kind of like have as a sounding board, or a mentor or something like that. But or ChatGPT, I guess, for some people. But anyway, you look at it, it's one of those. Like you're not just looking, it's hard sometimes because if the opportunity seems really good on the surface and the money does too, then we can get shiny object syndrome and then forget about all the other stuff behind it. So I would say a recent example that I had pop up was with a potential mural client that reached out for having something painted on their community center. And even though the theme was a little bit outside of my usual style, like y'all don't really know me for sports stuff, do you? I was still like willing to expand my horizons because I was like, well, I can still make it my own thing as well. Like, it can still be an expansion, but um once we got started talking, one, the budget was slow. Two, the location was far away. Three, they had a relatively tight deadline. And I was like, what? Mentally, I'm like, why did he wait till the last minute? But anyways,
Yep.
and then add to that a corrugated metal surface. Lovely. Outdoors. Lovely. I was like,
No.
and the amount of space they wanted on the wall, I'm like, I would have had to rent a sister lift, which would automatically dock easily a third of my pay out of the gate. And I'm like,
Right.
this is looking way less attractive by the second. I still did want to put, best foot forward. So I put a good mood board together. I crafted a nice email where I was gently, essentially, but firmly proposing that we keep the design within the reach of a tall ladder. Like, I have a pretty tall one, but I was like, if we can do it without,
Yeah.
rented equipment, is it tight based on the budget? Yes. Is it doable? Yes. But we got to make some compromises. And honestly, I don't think they like that. Even though I did give them two prices, I was like, look, with your budget, this is what I can do. But if you can pay a little bit more, aka basically cover the price of the lift rental, I can give you a little more square footage in terms of what you want me to
Right.
paint. But I don't think they like that very much. So I lost the opportunity to other artists that also were submitting proposals, and I was actually pretty relieved because otherwise, literally, I had already like started on ChatGPT writing my no to them to say
Yeah.
like due to unforeseen scheduling conflicts, which would be kind of be well, I mean kind of. Okay, that's kind of realistic. But literally I was like preparing that to just
Yeah.
be like based on the deadline and other scheduling conflicts, like thank you so much, but no. But I can refer you to another artist. Hey, so it
Yeah.
was kind of like that. I mean if they were like local, I think it would have been better. But the amount of travel that was also involved, it's too
Yeah.
much. Too
Travel's a
much.
huge factor, and I think that's a very telling feeling that when you don't get the opportunity, you're actually relieved is very telling and also worth exploring if anyone else has felt that, whether it was a mural you didn't get, maybe a solo exhibition where you say, you know what, like I really realized I would not have been ready for that. Maybe it's a market you didn't get into. I would kind of challenge people to process that feeling of like, okay, well, what was it that was making me have anxiety or like preemptive stress about that opportunity, and make note of that, because I think that's a good filter for future opportunities, not to not pursue them, but to change your mindset accordingly, or if it's like in this case a client, like change your price accordingly, because I've had clients like that before, which is kind of a similar situation, a little bit different, to where most recently I had a mural client who normally for my process, I have like the initial meeting with them. We have different points of payment and contracts, but there's a few weeks for the design and then a few weeks for the production, obviously depending on the scale of the project. But for this client, we had our meeting on a so they reached out to me on a Sunday. We had a meeting on Tuesday, and when we got on site for the meeting, they said they had like 3 or 4 different walls that they wanted and a window mural. And they said, ideally, we could have all of it done by Thursday. Thursday is in like 48 hours from then, which, like, even in person, I was like, well, obviously, a mural inside, like, we cannot do that in 48 hours. I'm like, we could maybe do the window mural in my head just because it's like, okay, you could have it up for 2 or 3 months because they were already talking about like changing it seasonally. And I'm like, great, if the first one's not like perfection, it's a temporary mural essentially. Um, so I got my quote together, but the thing I learned from previous clients when I had this feeling was I basically made my entire proposal as it would be on the normal timeline, like the set number of weeks for design, set for production. And then I said, based on the rushed production fee and rushed design design timeline, like this is what the equivalent additional fees would be. Um, because I found, especially from like educating your client, they don't know that that's a ridiculous ask, right? Like giving them super, super benefit of the doubt. Which in this case, I feel like my client was, yeah, one, being very cheap about it, but also two, they really did think last minute, like, oh, wait, we have an opening event. We need something quick. So like it was just like them not thinking, and I don't necessarily want to bear the brunt of them not planning ahead. So I want them to know, okay, this is not my normal price. If you were to come to me 2 months from now and say, hey, we actually do want that mural that we discussed, it's not going to be that price. That was a X percentage increase because it was a 2 day turnaround, you know?
Yeah.
Um, but positioning it as a
Wait, so what
priority.
happened?
So
Don't leave us in suspense
leave
here,
it on a
Jackie.
cliffhanger. So turns out in the end, my gut feeling was right. I had a gut feeling that like they, yeah, just didn't prioritize it. Um, I wanted to make sure that this wasn't, you know, like an afterthought, and I had a feeling because they were opening a space. And it was local, which was nice. There would be no travel, but because they were opening, that they were gonna be like skimpy with budget. But I did not let that deter me from what I price them. Honestly, if I was newer in my business, I maybe would have even tried to work with them or try to be like, you know what, it's like a good opportunity for exposure or whatever.
Yeah.
But I had a very similar feeling that you did, that as soon as they said, I basically submitted the proposal Wednesday, and even then they're like, oh well, we could push it back like a week. And even then they were like, yeah, I think we're gonna do like a more budget friendly option, and maybe 2 to 3 months from now come back to it. Where I'm like, they were looking to probably have it done for free, which is
What?
totally fine. And like I feel like I truly dodged a bullet with it, because like our previous episode about handling difficult clients, there were a couple of flags there that I'm like, I don't really know about all this. So,
48-hour murals. That's
what?
not 48-hour murals. That sounds like a meme.
Yeah.
That could be a cool shirt.
Yeah. 48-hour murals. Yeah, that is not my guarantee or not my business promise. We're not doing it. Because I think we talked about it in the previous episode, but kind of going back to that gut check feeling with clients, I think it's good to remind ourselves that there's always a triangle that clients are having to decide on, to where there's 3 points and you can only have two of the three things. It's either quality of what they're getting, the timeline in which they're getting it, or the price. And so I know the quality of the experience I would deliver and the work I would deliver would be high. So you can either get it on a quick timeline, but you're going to pay more for it. Or if you want to pay less, it's going to be on a longer timeline. Like you can't have all three, right?
Or
That is
lesser quality. Because
right.
sometimes you go for cheap and like fast timeline, cheap quality, and it's like you get what you get.
Exactly. So especially after sitting on it, I feel like the alternative ending to this would have been, okay, if I did it for way less money, maybe just for exposure, then they would have also expected that. That's another thing to think about, is you're also setting the standard of how you're training this client to treat you in the future. So, especially if they were looking at other locations or different walls to get murals done, do they think they can just text me on a Monday and by Friday they'll have a full on mural without any other like meeting or timeline? Like, no. So, if I had just done it for exposure, I definitely would have been burnt out like crazy. And I would have had to break other commitments that I already had in that time. So, ultimately, very glad to not do that. And also proud of myself for kind of recognizing those red flags early on and not saying no outright, kind of similar to you, Adriana, where you allowed, hey, these are the limiting variables. Here's solution A, solution B. If you choose neither, totally fine. But at least then you know, okay, I'm going into this more intentional and more informed with what I'm getting into, rather than the standard people pleasing of like, I'm sure it'll be totally fine. And then like you're like trying to paint this thing at 4 a.m. because they have an opening the next day. Like, no.
I mean, hopefully nobody got roped into that. Yeah, that's definitely one of those things where it's like you said, it's educating them as well. Um, which actually ties in perfectly to something that we all learn over time. It's like all these things, they have their own timing, right? Like you can't rush the design or it's going to be shoddy. You can't rush buying the paint last minute or the rollers or whatever. You're going to forget something on site. If they're rushing and you don't have a deposit, you don't have a contract run, like, a lot of things. But it's also the idea of like you're educating them to a certain extent to respect the time these things take, but you'll also learn what your timing actually is as well.
Mm.
So it's not just about saying no to them, which is what we just covered. Sometimes you have to say no to yourself. Sometimes it's just a scheduling thing. Sometimes it's just like you need to give yourself a break in between projects and stuff like that. But that's something we definitely want to dive into next is like sometimes the no is to you, not to them.
No, yeah, for sure. And I think for the story that I shared, that was kind of a huge factor of it because I would have been absolutely miserable even if they did say yes. Um, but I think even whether there's a client involved or not, to your point, we have to learn how to say no to ourselves because we can't do it all, right? Which we all have different seasons where we understand this or practice this better than other seasons to where I think especially as creatives there are so many ways that you can build an art business. You can sell work online, you can do art licensing, you can do painting commissions, you can do in-person markets and products and murals. Like there's so many different ways from an income stream standpoint that we talk about a lot on the podcast. But just because you can do all of these different things doesn't mean that you should, right? One, just from a business standpoint, from marketing, it can be very confusing from an outward perception. If you're like, oh, well, I do paintings and paint mugs and pet portraits and make bookmarks and do this and do that. So oftentimes, if you do everything, it may be confusing to your audience where they don't have a clear idea of what you do. You're just kind of like dabbling in everything. Um, but also understanding that sometimes having focus during a specific season can actually be more helpful because um, and one good way to do that is like to keep a list of all of your ideas, which we have other episodes about staying focused and not distracted in your creative discipline to where, okay, if you want to maybe explore a new medium or explore a new design style, do that during a time where there's no pressure to where you have this space, whether financially or timeline wise in your schedule to explore it freely, but understanding, okay, what at the core, going back to the beginning of our conversation, like what are your values, what are your goals, and what is your purpose? Like what kind of work do you want to be making and staying focused on that? Having focus rather than FOMO, I think is an often trade-off that many artists have of the shiny object of a new material or a workshop that you're like, well, now I have to do sculptures because I'm obsessed with sculptures now, which may be fair and may be something that you end up pursuing. But is this a one day hyperfixation? Is this a weekend exploration? Or is this something that you do want to spend the next 4 to 6 months exploring? Totally fine, but understanding that it has to be sustainable and intentional with the focus that you have. Because ultimately, um, I think another mindset shift that really helped me when it comes to this is that having discipline is a form of self respect. And that really resonates, I think, for people who can often get sidetracked or distracted with the shiny objects, with these new ideas. And as creatives, we have so many ideas, right? We can do all of these different things, but what should we be doing now, or what is this season of life conducive to, right? So having discipline is a form of self-respect, which I feel like is perfectly tying into this last week. I actually taught a virtual class for a conference up in Virginia where we talked about preparing for the holiday season. This was recorded in August. And so, yes, for some, they may think, well, the holidays are still several months away. Why would you even start thinking about that? And the class was really a reminder of the holiday season can get distracted by so many things. People get these ideas, myself included. I am so guilty of this, of like, do I want to start making this product now? Well, it's the holidays. People buy that. Do I want to start making ornaments? Do I want to start making bookmarks? I don't know. Like, we kind of have this idea that this is this wild card season of we want to do all these new things, which can be great, but within intentional focus. And so, for myself, one thing that I having that discipline of is there are new products that I want to be launching this year for the holiday season, potentially a series of original paintings or collages that I'm currently working on in my studio. But I have a firm no on like, I'm not taking any new painting commissions, maybe a mural design, but trying to paint it in the middle of December will like not happen. It'll be a probably early of the new year or figure out timelines. But so like no new painting commissions, and I'm just saying blanket no to markets. Um, or if I know artists that do markets, they say, okay, I'm only going to do this number of them because I know if I go over that number of, oh, let me just add one more market, let me just do one more, they get so burnt out that after the holiday season, they're like, was that even worth it? I don't think that me enjoying the holiday season was worth those two extra markets that I totally burned myself out on. So I feel like having that discipline, especially going into the holiday season, can be very difficult, but it's the perfect example of when you have to say no to yourself for the greater good of like your business and your creative energy.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. And I know this can feel, like we've mentioned, but I mean it's true. If money feels tight or there's like a big break in between some of the opportunities or projects you're working on, then it's like extra tempting to just like say yes just 'cause. But I would say like in my experience, even though my business can be seasonal, especially the mural side, I try to be mindful that my creative side is cyclical and
Yeah.
they don't line up usually. So it's like sometimes the opportunities will come when, from a creativity standpoint, I'm on the bottom of that wave, of the creativity wave. And then sometimes I'm super creative, have all these ideas, let's go, and crickets, no clients that want to act upon those ideas. So it's always like, and then like during that cricket time, that's when it's tough because then something will pop along and you're like, it's kind of like a little outside of what I do, but the money's decent. So, and then that's when you can get yourself into trouble sometimes. And kind of ignore some of the red flags we talked about. But I always try to remember, the top three things, I'm focused on, at the top of the mountain or North Stars, if you will. And if it's something outside of my main goals during that time, or during that season or during that cycle, whatever you want to call it, then if it's outside of that, I try to give it at least 24 hours of marinating before being reactive about it, maybe just like people pleasing emailing back. I'm like, you don't have to answer every email, every text like right away, I know, shocking. But some of you that know me are like, you take longer than that to respond. Yes, I know, okay. I'm kind of a slow respond back. But no, realistically, like even with a client, let's say it had been one like the one you mentioned, Jackie, then you delaying a response for 24 hours actually would have been great because then they would have been like, oh, never mind, because it would be tomorrow. And you'd be like, I can't paint in 24 hours. Like 48 is already ridiculous. 24 is even worse. So I feel like some people would filter themselves out, I guess, in that sense.
Yeah.
Anyways, went down a detour there. But no, I think to help you say no, definitely giving it some time, to think about it and, bounce some ideas or whatever, but not just saying yes right away. Harder if it's in person, but that's when I will always get, because it might be while I'm painting or while I'm at an event, and then somebody's like, "Oh, I'd love you to do this for me." And I'm like, "Sure." So first thing I'll do, I'm like, "Oh, you're real. Okay. What's your email?" And then you just like get their contact information and then follow up later. I mean, you can follow up like within minutes and saying it was nice meeting you, but the part about saying yes to what they just asked for, that part needs to marinate, with them and with you. But of course, as with everything, there are some exceptions to these things. The loophole, or AKA the yes, but strategy, is one of them. If your goal is the income, like if that is a big priority, um, and what work sells consistently, what work feeds your soul, ideally they overlap and not always. Then you ask yourself, like, am I willing to do this for income? What what are the limits or the boundaries of this that make it not worth the cost, right? Like that's something you have to think about. Sometimes that might mean tying back into the example Jackie gave is is it worth doing this market that maybe will make you $400, which would be nice and would pay, your car payment and your phone and something else, versus you miss Christmas with the kids.
Right.
Like that's the kind of stuff you kind of, because you were traveling to a market in another state. I don't know. You all come up with your own scenarios, but it is the kind of thing you have to think about and weigh against. Or I just spent all these hours making all these ornaments and I only sold 10 out of the 200 I made. There's always something you got to weigh in just because somebody thought it'd be a good idea for you to do ornaments, which you normally don't do, to sell at their boutique shop.
Right.
See where we're going with this. It's like, yeah, yeah. There's definitely more to figure out. But at first, it might be like, oh, this is awesome. This is a great idea. Um, and sometimes you will do it, and sometimes it will work out. But I don't know. Think as business owners, that's part of it. What's that expression? You throw everything at the wall, see what sticks, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do think there is a time, especially early on in your creative business, where from an income standpoint, it is helpful to explore like, how do I feel about selling original paintings? How do I feel about like art products versus original art products versus it's good to get experience in each of those versus to like kind of explore like how you feel about it, how your audience feels about it. Obviously, what sells is very informative. But yeah, to your point, is once you have the information of that experience, then making that intentional decision. Which, similar to the example that you mentioned earlier, where a few artists that we know, honestly, they may say, this is the work I want to share with the world, and it's what they're showing on their newsletter and on Instagram. But they still have a handful of projects, whether it's from previous people that they've done commissions for, or like one shop that sells this specific style of work that they do, that they don't really promote that they do it, but they technically still do it because it pays the bills, right? And I think that mindset can be like, okay, well, short term, it may feel like icky or that you're like selling out. But honestly, it can be a very good strategic decision, especially if you're looking to pivot your styles, because it's a short term, yes, quote unquote, sellout. You're just doing it for the money, but it's funding your long term goals, right? And so, an example, let's say you do for several years you were doing like these are totally random like watercolor commissions of people's houses, right? People love giving them as gifts. They're like very thoughtful and they can do, oh, here's your childhood house or here's your parents house, all these things, great for weddings. But they then decide, okay, I actually want to pivot into large abstract paintings. Maybe what they share online and social media are these large abstract paintings, but after a few years of doing these watercolor commissions, they have people that come back every holiday season asking for more. And they didn't necessarily go to abstract paintings because they hate the houses now, right? It just wasn't as fulfilling. So if they can tolerate doing them enough to where they're not miserable, it is a good payday, you know? And so I think that's the perfect example of you're intentionally using one income, whether it's a product, whether it's a commission, to fuel your long term goals. But the key to that is that you're intentionally choosing that. You're not feeling like you're like um, kind of restricted in your creative. Oh, I can't move forward because I have to keep doing these. You acknowledge, no, this is what is fueling where I want to go. But up next, we're going to keep talking about this a bit further, and we're going to talk more about 4 actionable tips to help you navigate those tough, do I say yes or do I say no decisions in your art business. But first, let's take a quick word from our sponsors.
This episode is brought to you by our Level Up Artist resources.
We understand that life as a modern artist can be both exciting and overwhelming. Plus, there's a lot of information out there, but what do visual artists actually need?
We've spent countless hours of trial and error, weeding through tons of information to find the gold so that you don't have to waste time going down those endless rabbit holes.
We created a library of PDF resources with bonus videos that cover everything from artist documents to exhibition prep, social media to technology, sales strategies, and artist mindset, several templates, and more.
Ready to get started? Head on over to levelupartists.com/shop to level up your creative career today.
Welcome back, everyone. So, before we wrap up today's conversation, we want to leave you with a couple of actionable tips that will help you navigate those tough decisions, especially when saying no might feel uncomfortable or when you really need the money, but you feel like this opportunity just is not aligned with you. There's a few ways that you can kind of help make your decision. So I would say the first one that I always start with is creating kind of like a master yes no filter list. So write down what are non negotiables for you as an artist. Asking yourself, okay, does this align with my creative goals? Will it bring me closer to the work I want to be known for? Is the compensation, whether in money, exposure, or community connection, worth the time and energy that would be required to put into this project? And using this list as kind of a gut check filter for any opportunity that you have, to where if you are hesitant on answering any of these questions or feel like you have to justify it, that's a very telling sign that maybe this is not the right commitment for you, whether right now, or it may be an opportunity that is better fit to share forward with another artist for their time.
Yeah. I think another tool to add to that toolbox is regarding having some money saved aside. A budget for boundaries, if you will. But essentially, if every time you get an opportunity or have a good sale, a commission, a mural, it's setting aside some of that money, call it rainy day money, if you will. Because again, I mean, as artists, we don't have a steady paycheck. Our money, like, it goes up and down, but sometimes it can be tempting to just be like, ooh, I got paid, whatever dollars and, Amazon purchases or Target or handmade stuff, like however you like to, or fancy restaurants, however you like to spend your money when you're just like, woo, like feeling like you have a windfall. But having the discipline to take some of that aside and being, like our businesses can be feast or famine sometimes. You have to prepare for the famine time, so to speak, right? Like when people are on vacation, nobody's hiring you. When people are in the middle of the holidays, nobody's paying you or hiring you. Like there are times where it's like, especially if you've been keeping good business records, you can look back and see, oh, my worst months are like early January and maybe like middle of July or whatever. Like it varies for everybody. But if you are keeping records, you can take a look back and prepare for those times. Even if it's just, having some sort of small cushion, which yes, we know sometimes you're gonna have to use it anyways, but replenishing that as much as you have, almost like almost like we should all have an emergency fund. Your business should also have an emergency fund of its own. And that way, when these opportunities pop up that you're like, but the money seems good, then you can look at your bank account and be like, no, we're okay right now. I can say no to this. Or maybe I'm going to pass it on, or maybe I'm going to team up with somebody else to do it, or their demands are ridiculous. And yeah, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that too is reframing that like guilt that we may feel. Kind of as our third tip before we wrap up today, really reframing it's not that you're rejecting this person or this opportunity, is that you're protecting your space for those who are more aligned with your purpose, right? So instead of thinking, oh, I'm letting them down or they're going to think poorly of me, think of, okay, I'm choosing what's right for my business, or I'm allowing this opportunity to go towards an artist that is better aligned for it. Um, Understanding also that boundaries are not unkind, they're actually just being honest. And in my perspective, I think clarity is the most kind thing that you can offer someone. And so also not leading the client on if you know the opportunity is not right for you, rather than backing out last minute, bringing up those concerns potentially early on to say we can work within this time frame, however that is going to affect the compensation budget that I would expect given this priority fee of expediting the process, which for some they may be like, yep, totally fair, I totally understand. Others may say, oh well, we're looking to get this done really cheap, and in which case you can say, okay, great. Let me think if there's another artist who maybe is looking for an opportunity that would have the time for it. And then filling in that artist with the context before they maybe agree to taking on the opportunity. But reframing that guilt into you're protecting space and not just building a boundary for no reason can definitely be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And another one would be to practice the not right now language, or I like to call it the marinating one, where you can have a few go-to phrases ready, especially if you need to wait to think about this, so that you can either say not now gracefully, or maybe just straight up saying no. And just being confident about it, but still approachable and friendly. Because you never know. Sometimes these opportunities, this one may not be an alignment for you, but that same person that reached out may have another project down the road that would be a good fit for you. So you still want to put your best foot forward, right? Do a good impression and I'll be like, hell no, I'm not doing that. Um, so a couple of things, you don't have to give, explanations, but a couple of examples you can say like, thank you for thinking of me, given my current workload or given the style you're requesting, this isn't a right fit for me at this time. I'm focusing on other commitments, but I appreciate the opportunity. Or one of my favorites, like I'm not currently taking on new commissions or my schedule's too packed for this one or something like that, but I actually know a few other artists who may be able to help you out with this project. Let me know and I'm happy to connect you. Which, with that one kind of tying into what Jackie just said, if you're going to do that, always ask the artist first. I always do. So I don't tell the client or potential client who. I just say, like, do you want me to connect you? Sometimes they don't. But if they do, then I'll reach out, to my calling tree of artists, depending on who I think would be a good fit for the project and the person's personality and budget. And then I'll say, like, hey, somebody's reaching out. Do I have your permission to share your phone number or your email with them? So, anyway, something to think about. And then sometimes those opportunities, again, it could lead to something else down the road of look at this person. They were so professional, even though they were saying no to me, they did connect me with somebody else. And if I have an opportunity later on, I would like to work with them. So you never know. When in doubt, though, definitely remember boundaries can help you focus on the things that will actually move you forward and feed your soul, and sustain you, in this business of ours, which can be a kind of a roller coaster at times. And, you know, it's important to be rooted in who you are, what your art is here to do, who you're trying to teach, if you're trying to teach, and saying yes to the things that support your growth and saying no to things that are just distracting or diluting or just depleting you. Even if it's hard, sometimes you got to walk away.
Yeah, I think especially remembering that you're also allowed to outgrow old yeses. So even though you say, well, this is a market that I've done every year for the past 3 years, you're allowed to say, you know what, this actually does not serve me anymore and does not fuel the type of business I want to grow. And you can outgrow that old yes. Allow yourself to change direction or focus or redefine what success looks like to you because we're always evolving, we're always changing. So is our creative vision, and so is our creative business. Because we're not here to please everyone. We're here to build something that's sustainable and fulfilling and have a creative outlet and business that serves us and the life that we want to be building. So allow yourself to redefine what success looks like to you. And that might include saying no to clients or to yourself for different opportunities.
Absolutely. But with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up and hope you enjoyed this episode.
As always, our blog will be linked in today's show notes where you will find episode notes and links to all of our other podcast episodes.
If you want to stay connected with us in between episodes, share your feedback, or have a question you would like for us to answer on the podcast, you can reach us through social media. I'm at ameighart across all platforms.
And I'm at jsandersstudio on all platforms. And if you want to follow the podcast, we are at levelupartists on Instagram.
You can also visit levelupartists.com to get immediate access to templates, resources, and modules to level up your creative career today.
Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you in the next episode.